Welcome, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to Plenty for Everyone. I am Jennifer Mulholland, and as always, joined by my co-leader and host, Jeff Shuck.
Hi, everyone.
And today we have the privilege of reconnecting with Sam Liebowitz, who is the conscious consultant and has a radio station that he's going to share a little bit more with you about. But we had the privilege of crossing paths with you, Sam, and had a lovely interview on your podcast and radio station. And it was really moving. And I remember leaving feeling so good. And so we talk a lot about following the feeling of feeling good, noticing when you're expanded, noticing when you come across fellow colleagues and human beings that have a resonance with your heart and mind and soul. And you are one of those people. So we are so grateful to welcome you into a conversation today as we explore leading with love for the month of February, and we explore what it means to be conscious as a human being, as a leader. Um, so many more threads, but truly honored to have you here with us today so our audience can listen and learn from all the wonderful things that you're up to. So I'll turn it over to Jeff to maybe give our audience a little bit of a background about who you are and what you're up to, and then we'll let you take it over from there.
Yeah, we're not going to let you talk, Sam. We're just going to have you on. We're going to talk about you in front of you.
Yeah,
So if
it's
you
okay.
listen to our podcast regularly, you know Sam's name and you know him because he hosted us, as Jen said, on his radio show, which is also a podcast back in the fall. If you don't know or don't remember, we want to just give you a little more context on Sam. So I'm going to read his bio. Um, and like a number of people who come on Plenty for Everyone, he has an impressive background. We're going to read the shorter bio, but there's a much longer one. And hopefully, on this conversation, we'll explore some of the many, many interesting things that he's working on. Sam Liebowitz, known as the conscious consultant, we like him already, is a facilitator, mentor, speaker, healer, serial entrepreneur, host of the top-rated radio show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, and is a four-time best-selling author, author of the #1 empowerment book, Every Day Awakening, a wonderful title. I can't wait to talk more about that. He is also the executive director of the Evolutionary Business Council and has been in business since 1993. He's owned several successful businesses. He's lectured in several venues in New York City, including being featured speaker at the TEDx Upper West Side in 2016. Sam, take it away. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Jeff, Jennifer. It is such a pleasure to be on your show. I really appreciate you giving me a chance to talk to your audience. It was wonderful having you on my show back in the fall of 24, and it's always a pleasure when somebody invites me onto their show because I'm so used to interviewing other great people that it happens once in a while, but doesn't happen that often. So thank you for
Wow.
giving me an opportunity.
Lovely. Well, genuinely mean it. I think we seek to feel enlivened and really believe that we all have this precious life to make something magical and meaningful out of. And, you are up to so many different things and interviewing so many fascinating leaders out there and organizations. Would love to hear a little bit more from you, just for context about, what feels alive to you today as you are in a lot of different, aspects of business, of healing, of conversations. What are you noticing, and what would you like to the audience to know a little bit more about you than just your bio as we read
Mhm.
it on paper?
Yeah, well, of course, there's a lot more to it than just that little bio. And while I've had many successful businesses, I did have one or two that weren't that successful. But I think really the path is really I've been on a spiritual path the majority of my life. I mean, there was a big chunk in the middle where I got far away from it. Like when I was in high school and college, I had some unexplainable events, and then I got involved with some friends, and I was very deep into the spiritual worlds back when it wasn't cool and it wasn't, there was no Oprah talking to people like Eckhart Tolle on her show yet. And then things kind of fell apart, and I felt really lost for a while, and I drifted for a long time, and slowly but surely the universe nudged me back onto my spiritual path, around 20 years ago, probably a little less. Um, but one of the big evolutions for me, and I had this conversation with someone recently, was that in my spiritual studies and in my just view of the universe in the past, a lot of people would talk about ascension, sort of developing these spiritual abilities so that we don't have to come back into this 3D world again, and we escape it, and we just go into the higher realms. And I have a very different view of things today.
Mm,
That actually, I believe that we're actually here to descend the energies
yeah.
and to create a better world for us to live in. And that there is so much goodness, there's so much juiciness in just being alive and being in a physical body on a planet, that the groundedness of being present to what's happening right here, right now, in this moment is actually more important than than going up and out and away. Uh, it's very easy when you're someone who's experienced trauma early in life to disassociate and feel like you're connected to these higher spiritual realms. The real challenge is, but can you be present to your body, and can you be present with the person who's right next to you having a deep conversation that might be uncomfortable? I
Yeah.
mean, that to me is the real growth.
Can you go explore a little bit of what I hear you talking to is real intentional embodiment, right? So that's a
Hmm.
practice.
Hmm.
Every morning I say to myself to remind myself the moment my feet hit the ground, I am fully embodied. And it
Hmm.
brings the presence into form, into this
Hmm.
dimension.
Hmm.
And at the same time, I am very interested and playing with higher dimensions
Hmm.
through psychic work, channeling,
Hmm.
um, non-form, right? So then you kind of lift
Right.
yourself up. And the dance that personally I've been playing with is accessing higher realms or the light or other dimensions, and then bringing that into incarnation, embodiment of full presence.
Right.
So for me, it's not an either or, right? It's like this
Right.
integration, and how do I learn to become aware of when I've checked out of my body and I'm traveling or I'm not really here versus what you're talking about. And we talk about in our book, Leading with Light, of practicing presence, of like getting yourself to be fully grounded and embodied in your own center. And so
Hmm.
maybe could you talk a little bit about how you are integrating maybe both worlds, and in a time where things are just quickening,
Yes.
changing,
Yeah.
speeding up, how do you find your grounding, your centeredness, um,
Mhm.
in that embodiment? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, sure. That it just all the things you said just reminded me of the old indigenous phrase that the branches of the tree can only grow as high as the roots grow deep.
Yes, beautiful.
And I'm going to expand it a little bit because in my world, I kind of use the filter of heart, mind, body, and spirit. Which are related to the four archetypal elements that are related to the four archetypal, everything. There's when you look at archetypes, having four archetypes is such a common thing. I mean, yeah, there are more, but the four key ones. And so I find, especially when I'm helping people, when I'm doing healing work, that because of pain and suffering and trauma and loss and grief, we don't feel safe in our hearts. We don't feel safe to feel our body. And because, especially in this society, we so overvalue mind and intellect, most people live their whole life up here in their head. And they forget there's this whole intelligent vehicle below our neck known as our body that gives us so much great information. And then, yes, spirit is part of that. And it's not that any one archetype is better than any other. They're all different. And as you say, it's the integration, but it's also it's sort of finding the balance and the harmony between all these four aspects. Because sometimes, let's face it, we need to be more grounded in our body. If we're going to the gym to exercise, if we're running errands, if we need to focus on details, being focused in the physical in our bodies is what's going to serve us at that time. But if we're going out on a date or connecting with friends, being in our heart space actually is going to help us to connect better to them. Now, again, this doesn't mean that the mind is completely offline, but it's what's the most forward. And if you're working on, I don't know, a budget, a project, a plan where you need to think things through, then mind is very helpful. Or if you're working on a creative endeavor where you're creating art or music or just you need inspiration to solve a problem, inspiration comes from spirit. And so then connecting with spirit, connecting with the higher worlds, getting access to information that we don't normally feel we have access to, but we actually do. It's most advanced spiritual teachers all say, like, everything is within us. Like, that's why they promote meditation so much, because it's going internal, it's going inward, because everything is inside of us. And so these four aspects of heart, body, mind, and spirit, to me, they make such a good map of our consciousness and our internal landscape that as we learn how to navigate that map and use it as a compass, then we can actually live a more full life, because then we know what it's like to be in our heart space and feel our emotions and feel our feelings. We know what it's like to be really present with someone because we can feel it in our bodies. And we maybe don't live in our mind, but we know that our mind also serves us. And we know that spirit holds us through the whole process. So that's the way I've really come to learn. It is a way of being in this world that, especially when things can be so chaotic and all the things are going crazy around us, then we know, okay, I need to be more grounded, more present, more centered, more in my body right here, right now. And it's very easy to get pulled off of that with media and all the stuff happening around the world and this country as well. But when we come back to the present moment, when we come back to just what's happening right here, right now, most of the time, it's actually okay. This doesn't mean we ignore that stuff, but it's learning to balance the awareness of what's going on out there to what's going on in here.
Mm. You said something there that built on what you opened with that I don't hear many people in this space talking about, but that really struck me as wise and needed, which is the idea, and I want to kind of check it out with you and make sure I heard you. But the idea that the work, the life, the beauty is right here, right now. It's all around us. It's not somewhere else. And the analogy we sometimes use with people, and let me back up. I think there is a trap that you can get into in this space where you practice meditation or journaling is my meditation or music and all these ways that really are kind of conduits to being more present, but we kind of stop before we get fully present, and they're actually ways we shield us. So meditation becomes that thing I have to do to be centered, or otherwise the world's too crazy for me, right? But there's something on the other side of it that's being able to be more attuned, to be more open to the fact that the beauty and the healing is right here. And the analogy is going to a beautiful resort for 6 weeks. You get a 6 weeks vacation to Hawaii and you never unpack your
That'd
suitcase.
be nice.
Yeah, it would be nice, right? But imagine you never unpack your suitcase because you're always in the back of your mind saying like, well, I'm going to leave. I want to be ready to go. And I think I see that in some of the people we work with, and I see that in myself of really the goal of being present is to be present, to see what's right here, right now. And we don't always have to be trying to make things better for the next ascension, but that it's also, we have a role right here in this place and in this plane. I'd love for you to go deeper on that, because Sam, I don't think that's a message that is often sent. I think we're trying to escape sometimes and we don't admit it.
Well, what you have to really look at is, why aren't we present? Right? We all can say, oh yeah, I wasn't being present then, but why aren't we being present? Like, why aren't we constantly present all the time? And the reason why is because of the unprocessed energies that we all have inside of us from childhood, from growing up, from, again, the things I mentioned before, trauma, pain, loss, grief. Like, our nervous system in some ways protects us from having to deal with it because it can overwhelm our nervous system. It can overwhelm us. And so it purposely takes us out of presence, because if we were that present all the time, it would just be too much for us at the time. And where we, I would say, kind of lose our way sometimes is that when we're older and we do have the ability to deal with that, that we don't go in and say, okay, what's going on here? And I want to be also really clear that I don't believe any of us needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
That doing this work, it's not about going in there and getting rid of stuff and fixing pipes and clearing out it's just about uncovering what's already there, to have a greater awareness, a greater consciousness about it, so that then we can be more conscious, more aware, more present in our life. And so just because there's so many things going on around us does not mean we have to not be present. But if you look at most people these days, they're distracted on their phones, or they're doing 5 different things at once. And some people are really good at that. Personally, my wife gets upset at me because I can do a few things at once and I can still pay attention to everything. And she's only like, one thing, I can, you got to be here.
Yeah.
So it's not saying that like it always has to be just one thing, but it's being aware of why we're not being present. And for many people, there's some anxiety under the surface, or they just don't feel good about themselves, or they just, there's something in their experience, something in their path that just hasn't, they don't feel good about, or they don't feel like they can deal with. So then they have to find something to distract them. Otherwise, they're going to feel that
Yeah.
anguish. And so that's really the key thing is if we can uncover and be present to what is it that's keeping us out of present and hold it tenderly, hold it with compassion, not make it wrong, not not make it something we have to get rid of, but actually to give it some space, to give it some tenderness, and to open our hearts to it, then we actually can be more present because we're able to hold these things. And so then being present with you, Jennifer, with you, Jeff, is not a chore. It's not something I have to focus on. It's just something that naturally evolves.
Yeah.
Mm,
And it doesn't mean that like, you do all this work and then suddenly you're really present. No, it's a gradual thing. It's
mm,
not a on-off switch. It's a whole rainbow of variations of different colors that we just travel through as we do more and more of our work. We just start to naturally develop this ability to focus a little bit more, be a little bit more present, feel what the other person is feeling in our own body, connecting to them and really getting what's going on inside of them because you're focused on them and not on yourself.
lovely.
It's so I'm chuckling because some of the language you're using and the come from um, is really the foundation of what we believe and share and practice. And
Mm,
some verbatim of the teachings that we get to guide people through our leadership retreat, Lantern. But a personal passion is, for me, has always been a belief that our presence is our superpower. And
mhm.
Jeff and I have had rich discussions and meaty discussions when he says, well, I don't know if it's everybody's superpower. It may be yours. But, like I find and have been so committed to practicing presence. And I love what you're vulnerably sharing is the realness that it's not perfection of presence. It's a practice of presence because we get hijacked all the time,
Mhm.
not only from distractions and information coming in, but our own psyche of protection, which I really appreciate you
Right.
speaking to, that it's sneaky,
Yeah.
that protection part of ourselves. And I'm really reflecting these days around how does that work for me personally? Like,
Mm,
we teach a lot the space that you're speaking of, kind of a tactic or a tool that has been effective is imagining yourself as an observer, right? The observer, like, how do you create space? Well, one trick is to think about yourself as your best friend. Like, so what would
mhm.
you, if it was your best friend, would you be able to have a little bit more detachment, rather than viewing yourself as your own identified self, right? Like,
Right.
how do you get more space so you can see and observe and take in more of a neutral, detached way of seeing, sensing, feeling about whatever you're noticing through
Right.
awareness?
Right.
I but it's so damn tricky. And I'll use myself as an example because I'm struggling with this at the moment,
Mhm. Mhm.
of I'm doing a bunch of psychic training, as I mentioned. And
Mm,
whenever I go to those realms, for the most part, what comes through my guides is very light filled, very
mhm,
positive. And
mhm.
my teacher kind of has really kind of held me to the fire to say, allow the dark in too.
Right.
Allow the scary, like it's not going to hurt you to
Mhm,
see the dark, shadowy part. And
mm,
that practice, it's not to say like I've always kind of put a band-aid on the shadow parts of myself. I haven't. I go into deep judgment, deep criticism, like a lot of human beings, right? Of self-shame, self-judgment, because my mind is sorting good and bad all the time, light and dark. And,
and
it's
that right there is the the
a
the key
trick,
to it. That's the
right?
trick, is that we sort of have this natural judgment
Yeah.
that things are good and bad.
Completely. Yeah.
And what I teach people is to give more space, to stop judging for the moment. And the example I give is almost everybody has had some experience in life that at the time they were going through it, this was the worst, most awful thing, like couldn't wait for it to be over. Oh my God, when am I going to be done with this? And then 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, we look back on that experience and we're like, oh my God, I grew so much from that. It so serves me with what I'm doing now. It really,
Yeah.
and it's like, well, you have a totally different perspective now, but did the thing itself, did the incident itself change? No. What changed? Our perspective, our judgment about it changed.
Yeah.
So I say, well, look, we don't have the perspective in the moment to know whether it's a good or bad thing. So let's just not judge it for today, right? Let's put it off, like just to say we'll never judge it, that's too big an ask. But let's just not judge it for the next 24 hours,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Love
And
that.
then maybe the next day, okay, let's still not judge it for another 24 hours. And you just keep putting it off and putting it off and putting it off, so that eventually we can come to this place of accepting, like, everything just is. And
Mhm.
it's not good and it's not bad, it just is. And I just want to make a comment about what your teacher said to you about letting the dark in, because it reminded me of uh, 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 an experience I had when I danced with grandmother ayahuasca, and my intention was to be like one with the universe. And what came up through that whole journey was like war and destruction and death and like all these horrible things. And I'm like, what? And I mean, it wasn't like terrifying to me. I was just sort of observing all these images and stuff, and I didn't get it. Like, why is this coming? What does this have to do with my intention? And then the next morning, I realized, oh, what the medicine was showing me was that if you want to be one with everything, you have to be one with everything, even those things we think are not so good.
I I love where you're pointing, and I want to just underline this for people. The idea that, and this is going to sound a little cynical, but the word presence is used so much now in these circles. We use it a lot that I get concerned that it's getting kind of commodified the way mindfulness became just download the Calm app, and then before that it was
Mm,
resilience, which just and ended up meaning like grow a backbone, get tougher. And presence, I think sometimes people think like focus, like, okay, I'm present. I'm When you're pointing to, no, it's non-judgment, it's acceptance. It's a word we don't like in the West much, but surrender, you
exactly.
know?
Surrender. And this is a big one, because I all the people I work with so many people have a problem with letting go of control.
Hmm.
That like in order to be safe, there's this real unconscious pattern that in order to be safe, we have to control
Yeah.
something. We have to control an experience. We have to control this, have to control that. And that need to control turns into an anxiety. I'm very fortunate, I guess, because I've just been in so many out of control situations that I've never felt the need to control. But it's surrendering to the fact that we actually have very little control
Yeah.
of 99.9999999% of what's going on. But the one thing we always have control over is how we choose to respond and what choices we decide to make. Other than that, this world, this life, this universe is so complex and so intricate, and there's so many trillions and zillions different little things that all come together for something to happen. There's no way we could have any possible control over it.
Yeah.
I love that. And Jen, I'll let you get a word in, but just again, to underline this for people, you're pointing to the work being inside out work. It's not the opposite. And Jen's heard me tell a story of someone very close to me who recently I saw. He was really worried he was going to not get into the classes he wanted. He got into those classes. Then he was worried he wasn't going to get a good grade on his final. He got the grades he needed. He was worried he wasn't going to graduate. He graduated. Worried he wasn't going to get a job interview. Got the interview. Worried he wasn't going to get a job. And, if we need as a condition of our inner peace for all these requirements to be met, we'll find that the list is endless and we'll
Right.
never find peace. And it's actually the opposite. It works the opposite way as we find ourselves able to surrender to the fact that we don't control, and the duality is, and we're meant to be here. And
Mhm.
we're a tiny speck of dust, but our little speck matters, is the incredible duality of beauty of the universe. Then we see something opens for us. But I love how you also equated, that worry is a control mechanism ultimately. And so when people come to us and say, like, I'm awash in stress, I'm awash in worry, they want us to eliminate that one splinter that's making them concerned, but that won't do anything because there's another splinter that's going to puncture your skin. You have to go be willing ultimately to do the work. And I think a question to you, Jen and I have often, Jen calls it the Mack truck moment, which we've both had, that moment where you finally realize the world, oh shit, I can't control any of this. And we've often talked about is is the kind of presence that you're pointing to, the kind of conscious leadership that you're pointing to. Does it require the Mack truck moment? Do we just have to go through that crucible to be able to get to the other side and say, okay, Lord, I give up. You're driving. Is there a way to do it without having that moment,
Yeah.
And we haven't experienced it. But can we spare ourselves that?
I don't believe in absolutes. So, I almost never say, you always have to go through this or that, or it has to look like this or that. Um, and one of the reasons why is everybody's path is so different.
Yeah.
And we truly do not know what is it like to live inside of someone else's skin. And just because the majority of people might need to have a certain experience in order for there to be a shift doesn't mean it applies to everybody. Now, the real thing is, if you've tried everything else and nothing's working, then maybe, yeah, you do need that. So it's being open to everything, including the things that maybe we don't want to experience. In general, I find that everyone's path is perfect for them. It's not always what they want. It's not always easy, but it's perfect for them. And the, I heard the gentleman who I bought the radio station that you talked about before. When I'd met him, he had decided to become a Theravadan Buddhist monk. And he was selling off all his worldly possessions. And he was an acupuncturist, and we took over his acupuncture practice. He trained an acupuncturist, and he started the radio station. I took over the radio station, and when he was training that acupuncturist we brought in to replace him, I would listen to some of the things he would talk about to him, and he took a very Buddhist approach to healing. And one of the things he said to the new guy was, "We don't cure anybody of anything because we don't know what someone's kama vipaka is." And kama vipaka is a Buddhist concept of someone's spiritual karma. So you could have someone come in with cancer, you do a bunch of treatments, the cancer goes away, the next day they walk out and they get hit by a bus because that was their karma. And so it's really, that whole idea really humbled me because we don't know what somebody else's spiritual path is like. And so there's no way to say, like, what is it that they need to become more aware, more awake, more present, to develop, because we don't know the life they've lived. You know, if you believe in reincarnation, you don't know what other lives their soul has been through. You don't know what plan the universe might have for them, and and what some particular situation might do and where it might send them. Again, because we can't foresee the future. We have such a limited perspective. We're on this planet for such a relatively short amount of time. So when we can become more aware of how complex life is and how much more there is that's going on than just what we see in this physical world. Like Jennifer was talking about her psychic practices. I mean, those are great things to help to open us up to the idea that, like, energetically, there is so much going on that is so beyond our comprehension
Yeah.
that how can you not humble yourself once you're aware of all that?
Yeah. What I hear you talking to as well, I think is just such a grand invitation of these current times, of the nuance and a little bit of a juxtaposition of individuality and community. So I'm looking at your beautiful background of the flower of life and like
Mhm.
the image, right, of this image that's in nature, and it's the foundation of connection and community and oneness is with the flower of life's
Mhm.
one of its representations, and the idea that we are a communal species. We need each
Yes,
other to thrive. And
yes.
there is an awakening happening with so much change and information. Even today, giggling, like waking up. I can't remember the exact name of the new Chinese AI,
Oh, deep seek.
deep
Yeah.
seek, right? Like overnight deep seek,
Mhm.
completely, changed NVIDIA's like whole
Right.
trajectory of
Right.
AI if you're paying attention to tech right now. And just how all of a sudden innovation just took a leapfrog overnight with a new way, a new model, right? That's way
Mhm.
cheaper, way faster, et cetera. And um, so there's so much coming in. And I hear our collective commitment, the three of us and our work of the inner work. It's about you. It's
Mhm.
about you, us pulling our energy back, our taking care of, knowing what lights us up, knowing
Mhm.
the alignment of our hearts, our body, our mind, and our soul or spirit, as you're talking about, and how that works for us as individual
Right.
people.
Right.
And yet we live in a communal like kingdom,
Right.
right? And we need
Right.
each other to thrive. So I've, part of gathering, part of having these conscious conversations is to create a resonance that kind of helps people, I feel, awaken to themselves, their soul, why they're here, to help take the energy and the attachment to certainty or attachment to change another or attachment to a belief or an idea of right or wrong, all these themes that we're talking about, to bring that back into knowing what it is we need to feel grounded, to feel
Hmm.
like we
Hmm.
matter, Jeff, like to really know what you're talking about. And then how do we share that in community with an allowance for others to be themselves too? And so I feel like we're in this cusp of transition from a human
Yeah.
evolutionary standpoint of bringing our kind of field of awareness, our practice of presence back to self and soul. Like my business is my business. Your business, what you think of me, is none of my business. And actually, I have nothing to do with you, like in a way, right? But then we're connected in this sacred oneness where we're made of the same stuff and we're here on the planet for a very short period of time to make a positive difference. So maybe could you kind of explore, maybe you and Jeff, like in the few minutes we have remaining, of this connection between the individuality and the communal play of what is being called forth? How do we
Hmm.
show up together? How do we commune and
Hmm.
yet keep kind of the awareness, the path, the practice of our own story, our own becoming in alive and well in the communal kind of, I don't
Yeah.
know, becoming that's there.
We are social creatures, right? We
Yeah.
don't exist on an island. We need other people, but and we learn so much more about ourselves when we're in relationship to other people
Yeah.
because they reflect back to us stuff about ourselves we often don't look at. And it's when we bump up to another human being that friction is caused that gives us very fertile soil to look at what's going on.
Yeah.
Whereas if we're just by ourselves meditating in a cave or a forest, like my friend who I got the radio station from, not that much interaction, there's not that much to learn about yourself in a way. But to me, community is so, so important. It's something we've, in a way, in modern society, getting far away from. I live in an apartment building that has 400 units in it. How many neighbors do I know? Well, I know two really well. I know a handful of others by sight, and the majority of people, I have no idea who they are.
Yeah.
And in this world and with the challenges that we're facing, we actually need to come together and know our neighbors and know our community to be able to support and help each other. Now, and there are beautiful things happen sometimes, like when there's a tragedy with what just recently with the wildfires in Los Angeles, or what happened earlier in the last year in Asheville, North Carolina. I know people in both those places, people really coming together in community, helping each other to try and do what they can to survive and recover from those tragedies. Like that, it's really quite interesting. Most people think like, oh, when there's some natural disaster and things are out, and then people are just all out for themselves. And what they've found, and they've done studies on this, it's actually just the opposite, that when a disaster strikes, people come together even more and support each other and help each other. And they may not have much, but they share it with their neighbors. So I'm just like, why do we have to wait for a disaster to do that?
Right.
Um, but yeah, community is so important. And when we can be with a group of people who are like-minded, like-hearted, like-spirited, and we can feel safe to be vulnerable, to be authentic, to be who we are and share from our hearts, that connection in and of itself is tremendously healing. Like, like just being seen, being recognized, being heard. How many people do you know who just like, I just want to be heard? That connection can be so, so valuable to our hearts and our souls, that when we experience that with a group of people who also just want the same things, then we experience true safety. And then when we feel really safe, then we're safe to be present. And then we can come together to support each other, help each other, and do something that to move things in the direction we feel things need to go.
It's lovely. There's two sides of that I want to amplify. That was lovely, Sam. And actually, before I say what I was going to say, I do want to highlight for people this way that Sam is speaking and talking. He's even a better writer. His blog is well worth reading. I want to just read people a few of the posts from just this year. He's very prolific. Falling is not a problem, only our response to it is a post from a couple weeks ago. Feeling lost is about the disconnection with ourselves. 2 weeks ago. Last week, projections are the biggest clue to our own work. It's just a series of lovely pieces of wisdom. I mean, one after another. So I want people, if this is resonating with you, you can find the blog at theconsciousconsultant.com/blog. You can give your email address and get that wisdom every week. So I want to make sure I highlight that. But the other thing I wanted to say is the twin things you just pointed to, the tragedy, the way that we respond in tragedy, and what's possible when we're together. I do think, to this point, Jen, that you've been making, that those are existing all around us. And I think to the tragedy, if we imagine how sometimes lost and insecure we feel, and then just see that everyone around us often feels the same way, we would see the tragedy that goes on all the time. And if we could be in that space, it would inspire us to such compassion. I really feel that, because there is a tragedy of mental health, of inadequacy, of feeling lost and alone that we could solve every day with the people we meet. And that gets to the other side of it, which is a few times this month already on podcasts or blogs, we've talked about one of our themes for the year, which is very uncool for this year, but it's optimism, and how it's so trendy to be pessimistic right
Yeah.
now. And yet there's so many things around us and we're capable of so much. One of our clients calls this time a moment of stunning possibility.
Mm.
And we read that phrase back to them a couple of weeks ago, and I got a lump in my throat when I read it, of how wonderfully optimistic it was to call this moment in time a moment of stunning possibility. And in their case, they were talking about science and how technology can be harnessed with homeopathic methods to create healing, and just really cool stuff. But we also, there's a moment of stunning possibility around our own human kindness and our own ability to see each other as we want to be seen, and to offer each other optimism. So when we're trying to create community, if we want a more hopeful world, all we need to do is be the one brave enough to offer an idea of hope to people. If we want a more positive or optimistic world, we have to be the ones to start with something positive to say. And it's really easy to be pulled into the other place right now. And I think that's why we're being called to do something a
Right,
little
because
more optimistic.
there's so much in media that's all about the division, the polarity, the negativity, the violence. because you don't hear about all the amazing, wonderful things that are happening throughout the world, the flowering of consciousness that's going on. There really is a lot. And yeah, like times of chaos is very fertile soil for new things to be birthed and new possibilities to happen. And I agree, like being optimistic, beats the alternative.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean uh,
Amen.
we're not concerned about the future. It doesn't mean we don't have certain doubts about where things might go. But being pessimistic is just not going to get us very far. At least if we're optimistic, we're willing to try to move the needle in a different direction.
Yeah. And I just,
Lovely.
to close out, I think the theme of what you pointed to in the earlier part of our conversation is having faith that we're in design.
Hmm.
If you believe in a higher power or a higher light or whatever you name that to be, that we're this small speck in a larger universe that has an intelligence that's working out on our behalf, and not just ourselves individually, but as a collective. And it helps me to think about the people, the leaders, the division, the vilified people that look like they're doing so much harm. It's not to say that you're going to give people a pass, but what if I call them angel escorts to a new way? Like, what if things need to break down and be revisited and new perspectives being opened? Things
Hmm.
that were hidden beneath the surface now are becoming
Hmm.
to the light, if you will, becoming
Hmm.
more available to know full truth, and or detaching and like really using yourself to say, does this land with me? Like
Hmm.
what if we were able to kind of open to what you talked about, presence of being able to, I think, have that optimism that what if there was this beautiful, intelligent design that I can't help but continue to see behind you, of like there is a design in the universe and we have a part to play in that. And um, just really appreciate your come from and your way. I think this has just been such a enriching and a reminder of following that feeling of feeling good when you have a connection with somebody. You can't make it up around even language and your come from and your generosity of spirit and how you are sharing your path with businesses and people from all over. Just really appreciate you, Sam, and how you're coming at sharing your wisdom. And before we let you go, would love for you to maybe share a little bit about your event coming up for the Evolutionary Business Council, I believe,
Thank you.
and anything else you'd like to share with our audience so they can find you and stay connected to the conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jennifer. I really appreciate that. So, just a reminder, I do have my own show that I do on a weekly basis. It's called The Conscious Consultant Hour, oddly enough. And you can find it at the website, talkradio.nyc /listen live, or just go to our YouTube channel, which is at Talk Radio NYC. Um, I am been a longtime member, and now I'm the executive director of a wonderful organization of transformational thought leaders known as the Evolutionary Business Council. And we do virtual deep dives, and we do an in-person annual retreat once a year, which is coming up in San Diego. The last weekend in March, I believe it's March 26th to 28th. And you can find out information about it if you just go to the website, which is the letter E, the letter B, and the word council.com. It stands for Evolutionary Business Council, ebcouncil.com, and you can learn all about it. And I'll be there in person. I would love to see some of you folks come out. So thank you so much. I appreciate you both, Jennifer,
Absolutely.
Jeff. Thank you so much for bringing me on your show.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sam. Thanks everyone for listening. All of those links and a few more will be in the blog post that accompanies this podcast. So please go check out Sam, subscribe to his newsletter, and do your soul a favor. It's just wonderful reading and learning, and great to connect with you, Sam. Thanks for the difference that you're making to us and to the world. We need you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Be well, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in. Join the conversation and learn more at www.plentyconsulting.com.